handle the truth.
The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman, Seattle, over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder, Seattle, out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Grid to suppress, Mike Charlie, 4 tree 5, 9er 2-1. Grid to mark, Mike Charlie, 4-7 tree 9er, 8-9er, out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck, 2 rounds AGPT, gas TOT 5-3.
And now, the Denise Simon Experience.
And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Denise Simon Experience, heard worldwide on Mojo 50. I've got the distinct pleasure of having Steve Yates with us. Now, Steve was the former Deputy National Security Advisor to Vice President Cheney, and he's presently the CEO of DC International Advisory. So that means that Steve has got to watch everything all over the place when we use the term international. But I've seen Steve discuss Iran. That's kind of where we want to go today. So we're so pleased to have you, Mr. Steve. Thanks for being with us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
We keep hearing about these tankers and the Persian Gulf and Iran and blah, 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 blah. But one thing that's kind of left the headlines is Iran's influence in Iraq. And I think that is kind of another festering problem here that's being left undiscussed. Is that about right?
Well, there certainly are many, many issues that don't get discussed. And that is very, very helpful to the theocratic regime in Iran because they want to focus an agenda very narrowly, usually on claims of challenges to their own security or the U.S. government's decision not to give them incentives to continue to be bad. And so they try to play a victim or try to play some kind of new benign leadership role in the broader Middle East. They, for a very long time, have had unhelpful dealings with factions inside of Iraq. They have blood on their hands during the height of the Iraq War when it comes to U.S. men and women in the military, but also to innocent Iraqis and others that fell victim to their security forces interfering. That hasn't really stopped. They play in their region. They mess around in Syria. They mess around in Iraq. They are, I think, a force that is very, very unhelpful in broader strategic interests. And so that's why I think it is important to talk about the things that they do besides the usual talk of either oil markets or are we making a deal?
You know, kind of as a comparison, Steve, we see that Russia's got their fingerprints all over the globe. I mean, they obviously have it in Latin America. They obviously have it in Africa. They obviously have it in the Middle East. China, I would say, is the same way. They're in Latin America. They're in Africa. They're in the Middle East. And Iran does too, right?
Iran does a great deal. And one of the things that did get covered for a bit was Iran's role together with both Russia and China in the terrible situation in Venezuela. Of course, they have enabled the regime of Hugo Chavez that took one of the best endowed countries in the Western Hemisphere, natural resources and otherwise, and turned it into an economic travesty. But his successor, Maduro, has done just as poorly for the Venezuelan people in destabilizing the region as well. And the Iranians, together with the Chinese and Russians, have been trying to help this kleptocrat basically stay in power. And they basically are three regimes that have no respect for the dignity of the individual. They are different in some ways in that Russia is fueled by its petrodollars. China has a nearly unlimited supply of people, has very well endowed coffers on capital and technology now, and Iran is sort of an opportunist power in trying to make problems for the United States and also to solidify some of its energy market needs around the world, cultivating its customers, so to speak. So it would be a mistake to think of Iran as just a regional influencer power that actually does things that are unhelpful much more broadly.
Okay. Thank you for that, because I agree. I like to be validated by people that are smarter than me, so thank you for that. And there's lots of them out there.
Questionable proposition.
We keep hearing now, because of all these sanctions, that Iran is suffering financially. Okay, we'll take that. And there are certainly indicators that they are suffering financially. Now, having said that, these games that they're playing with Syria, with Venezuela, with Britain, even with the Gulf, the Persian Gulf, what define this tactic? I mean, if they are broke, how can they be? I mean, are these a lot of this just words, and or is there some other something going on that we don't know about that you need to tell us?
Well, they clearly have means, and there are examples of other countries around the world where their people live in horrific poverty or otherwise terrible circumstances, and yet their governments seem to have the means to pursue very expensive and various dangerous weapons. North Korea comes to mind. And so just because sanctions are hurting the Iranian economy, and perhaps the sanctions are starting to hurt Iran's leaders, I really hope that is the case, because Iran's leaders deserve to have the targeted sanctions hit them personally and hit them where it counts. And so that's basically the strategy the broader Western coalition has been trying to follow, with episodic, meaningful support from the European leadership. But they are not devoid of the resources to cause trouble, and they do have a plentiful supply of oil, which calls into question why they need nuclear energy. But the oil guarantees that they're never truly going to be poor unless there are no customers for that oil. And so there are some things happening in the world right now that could hurt them worse than U.S. sanctions, like China's manipulation of its currency and other markets could hit oil markets, and that would hurt both Russia and Iran. So we'll see what happens on that front. But the Iranian regime, it's important to note, we get stuck in a frame of reference that is very current. That's understandable because that's what our news does to us. But the Iranian theocratic regime has been at war with the United States since the takeover from the Shah and the keeping of our hostages.
Yes.
They have never really stopped being at war with us. We pretend otherwise, but we keep learning and unlearning the lesson that some wars are not actually declared by us. People declare them on us, and we don't have any control over that. And it's only a question of whether it's hot, cool, or somewhere in between. But they haven't stopped, and that's what that government is all about.
Tell me how true or false this next statement is, Steve, and that is the Ayatollah Khomeini is one of the richest men in the world, so his money has to be somewhere. True or false?
Well, it sure sounds like an uncontestable statement to me. I have no idea about who is the richest person in the world because I lack the ability to count that high in many ways. So there are other people around the world who are quite wealthy, and for all I know, they might have outstretched his means. But there's no question that he's like the communist leaders in other countries that talk about egalitarianism and the working class and providing services for the poor and all of this. They seem to make themselves quite wealthy. If you go down the net worth list of the communist leadership in China, they'll have impressive wealth. Kim Jong-un is not living on food stamps. And there are lots and lots of examples of these absolute evil liars that espouse communism and socialism, who are living quite high on the hog, just the same, and Ayatollah is among them.
Their monies have to be somewhere. And I would say that our Treasury Department knows where it is, even when you have these front operations and these banks that don't necessarily cooperate. We do have a pretty good view of the wealth of the Ayatollah, the money that has been stolen by Maduro, the money that has been seized and otherwise perhaps stolen by Putin himself. We have the old phrase, follow the money. Are we doing enough of that, Steve?
Well, I'm sure that we could always do more. I know that the U.S. Treasury Department, one of the things it has done very, very well in recent decades is execute and fine-tune the tools to track and then take action against illicit money. Early in the Bush administration, when I served in the White House, we had teams of people that were looking at counterterrorism financing, but also looking at the axis of evil, as it was once called. I worked especially closely with people who were trying to go after the illicit activities of North Korea's regime, which had dealings with the Iranian regime, and you get a window into things there too. But the Treasury Department has a specialized set of sanctions to go after money laundering, but also the financial assets of key leaders who have been designated by U.S. law for sanctions. That we were supposed to have full cooperation of the august international entities under the United Nations, because they're all about peace and making everything better. I say sarcastically.
I laugh sarcastically.
Because that's actually where the problem starts. The Treasury Department does have tools. I'm sure they could do more, and maybe there's ways the U.S. Could give more resources and capabilities to them. But we're really still operating in an internationalized monetary market. And so it really comes down to the degree of cooperation and enforcement we can get with international partners. The trump card, so to speak, that we have is the absolute need for oxygen in that monetary market is access to the U.S. dollar and to be the access to the U.S. financial system. And I think we could possibly be a little bit more aggressive, not just with the targets of these sanctions, but their enablers as well, to force them to have to choose. Are you going to do business with them, or are you going to do business in our big ocean?
I ask that because we just put on these huge, wide sanctions, probably the largest sanctions architecture package out there on Venezuela. So that
Correct.
says that Venezuela has got some accounts and some monies that are residing here in the United States. We have also found that on some front companies, Iran has some monetary and real estate interest here in the United States. Zarif, who we just finally sanctioned too independently on his own exclusive sanction, doesn't appear to have any in the United States. But we're not necessarily getting cooperation on Iran with Europe. So I guess where I'm going with this is when it comes to cooperation, we are obviously proving some things to our partners, but they're not taking the bait. Why not?
Well, it's a good question. I don't know that I fully have the answer to it. We only have our own experiences and theories about why people won't do the right thing and won't honor the requests of partners that have been very good to them and partners that have enormous capabilities when they may be in a time of need at some point. But for whatever reason, there are a lot of corporate leaders and government leaders across the European continent that seem to think that they can have their cake and eat it too, that they don't have to invest in their own security, be it that, like we're talking on these sanctions or financial areas, or their physical security when it comes to investment in their national defense and the defense of a collective alliance like NATO. And their thinking seems to be either, one, they're in a postmodern dream where all evil seems to have ended and history has sort of turned some kind of major corner. And if we'll all just find a way to get along and don't let the bad Americans wreck things around the world, and we can make deals and we'll have normative controls over those that are trying to grow up and follow the rules. But that's basically, in my mind, a postmodern dream. And they should have been awakened from that when the Syrian civil war completely turned their politics, economics, and demographics upside down. They should have been awakened to that from that when Putin decided that, this little piece of the Crimea here, I'm just going to take that. And it doesn't really much matter what kind of international obligation you seem to have made to protect the territorial integrity of a nuclear power for them to give up the world's most dangerous weapons. So I think the Europeans need to be among those that I categorize of, do you want to deal in the U.S. financial system, or do you want to do business with the government of Iran? And if we aren't willing to go there, I don't know that we can really criticize them for playing both sides. I think it's wrong. I'm not trying to imply they should, but it's not entirely irrational.
So having said that, with Brexit, my gut tells me that the UK may be the lead, and we're going to have to wait for some full cooperation with regard to Iran until after the clean Brexit happens.
Well, it's very, very likely the case. I mean, I'm very curious to see what Boris Johnson's tenure as prime minister might bring by way of independent action by the UK. And we're in the early days of seeing that. Some signals from him personally with regard to China kind of give me pause, but I'll hold my judgment for a time to see what actions end up being taken with regard to some concerns on that front. Huawei technology is kind of the litmus test right now.
Everything's so complicated.
But it's sort of the same kind of thing. Are you willing to kind of stand on the side of freedom, really, to make it simple? Or are you going to stand on the side of control or those who seek to attack the institutions of freedom, like the theocrats in Iran do? So to me, it's a very simple question, but it's easy for me to say. And the jury's out on where the UK may go and broader Europe. I do think that the whole Brexit thing has been tragic in the sense of how long it has taken for a government to figure out how to honor the will of its people. And that, I think, is a larger problem for our democracies.
Now, here's an interesting thing that has happened here. Apparently, Senator Rand Paul played golf with Trump and asked to be the lead envoy in establishing some back-channel conversations with Iran. And Trump said, sure, great. And apparently there was some kind of meeting between Senator Paul and Foreign Minister Zarif. Is this complicating the activities of Pompeo's State Department with regard to Iran?
Well, I'm sure that there's an endless number of things that complicate the life of every Secretary of State.
Touché.
and Pompeo is going to live through that as well. But, we have a different kind of president, and I'm okay with having a different kind of president. And this president, without having taken any of the pressure off of some of the targets of these negotiations, whether it's North Korea or others, he is willing to explore what are the cards you have in your hand, and are you willing to put them face up on the table? And if you are, then I am willing to come to the table in some form or fashion, and I'll put some of my cards face up on the table. And we'll see where exactly we stand. And either we decide we're going to continue negotiations, we're going to walk away from negotiation, we might have the contours of a deal, but as the CEO of the American government, I think it's rational for him to go and see if he can get better information on what exactly are the cards that they have and can we get them face up. Now, I would be somewhat shocked if what Senator Graham or any other envoy who engages Zarif, someone who I think is a very practiced liar and deceiver, is going to get any different information than what Pompeo and everyone else has had. We've had many different kinds of envoys. There have been decades of talks with Iranians, and we have played this game of hardliners versus reformers and everyone else for decades. And I think the con has gone on so long that I would be shocked if there is any new or meaningfully strategic information that comes out of it. But as long as we're not taking the pressure off, I see no harm in having the conversations. What gives me pause is when we have leaders like Barack Obama was, who seems to believe the smoke that's being blown in our general direction, and then wants to make deals that result in money going to these regimes without having measurable progress on the issue that we're supposed to be negotiating, or ignoring problems in other areas. So I see no harm in what the president seems to be doing on this. It's a difficult situation that every president before him has failed to really address. So there's no harm in exploring, but I have very deep skepticism a deal is to be had. This country, the theocrats that are running Iran, against the will of the Iranian people, in my estimation, they've made their views known consistently for 40 years.
Is Russia, I'm getting some indications here that Russia is helping Iran financially. Is there some truth to that?
Has to be. I mean, it's a long-term strategic relationship. Russia, as I said, Russia is a country, almost Freudian slip company, because it's governed by petrodollars. So
yeah.
It's a large oil company with the KGB. And so they deal in arms, they deal in oil, and they don't mind lighting small, medium, or large fires in different places that are distractions or nuisances to the United States. But Iran's dealings with Russia and vice versa are long-standing. And the Chinese do some of the same kinds of things too. And so that interplay is not terribly shocking or new. And there's probably ways we should be better at getting after it. We've struggled at times when we tried to put pressure to get our allies to stay out of doing different kinds of projects in Iran in order to honor sanctions. But the Chinese and the Russians go in and swoop up all that business. And our allies come to us and they say, in some ways, rationally, look, these projects are going forward and the money is flowing to other people who aren't your friends. Wouldn't you be better off at least if the money was flowing to countries you could trust? And so that's a complication. I'm not saying we should go that way, but it's at least a rational argument they bring back. And it has to do with the difficulty we've had in trying to deal with the Russian influence, the Chinese influence in Iran.
Everything is so complicated, Steve.
Well, there's good and evil in the world, but there's a lot of things that are sort of the collateral contributions made in between those two.
Well, we keep hearing that the United States left the Comprehensive Joint Plan of Action, JCPOA, and that is the crux of the matter. And I just think that that's an excuse. I don't think that the JCPOA is the single excuse for why Iran's not behaving and wasn't going to be a good neighbor on the globe. Would you agree?
I think that whole notion is contrary to history and is just not factual at all. The starting point of this problem was American failure to keep the Shah in power and to allow the theocrats to take over Iran. And we really have not ceased to have provocations from Iran from that point forward. Sometimes they're covered, sometimes they aren't. Sometimes it results in dead Americans in other countries. Sometimes it results in destabilizing markets or trying to threaten the security of the high seas. And so we've been dealing with manifestations of this for 40 years. And it's just naive, simplistic, and I think just partisan crap to try to say that this all started when the Trump administration walked away from what was a failing deal.
Well, Mr. Steve Yates, thank you for being with us and explaining some of this. I'm going to keep watching you because I like the fact that, you're keeping a wide view on all things Iran. So thank you for your insight on this. And ladies and gentlemen, there's more coming your way on the Denise Simon Experience, so stay with us. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for staying with us here on the Denise Simon Experience, heard worldwide on Mojo 50. You know, I would say sometimes that misery loves company, and here we are in the United States. We're a little on the miserable side for various reasons. So we kind of want, as everybody else is miserable as we are. So what do? I tap my buddy across the pond over here, David Clews, who is the top editor in chief, I guess, manager of the Unity News Network. I guess that's all your roles. You got some big roles over there. David has been with us several times to discuss all things Brexit and what's going on in the UK, and mostly because whatever's happening there could be happening here sometime later, if not sooner. But Mr. David, thanks for being with us on the Denise Simon Experience.
Thanks, Denise. An absolute pleasure. Nice to be on again.
Okay, so you have some new leadership over there in the UK, and gosh, what a contentious time that you guys have had after Theresa May has gone away. I'm guessing that there was an awful lot of anger leading up to Theresa May leaving for various reasons. Were you? Was the country delighted that she's gone?
I think all sides of the divide were delighted she was gone. Left-wingers, right-wingers, Remainers, Brexiteers. I think she was one of these leaders that just tried to appeal to everybody and actually ended up appealing to nobody.
Nobody. Mm-hmm.
So she's been really, really poor. She tried to get a Brexit deal that worked for everybody and it worked for nobody. So I think it's a breath of fresh air that she's gone. And most importantly, her cabinet is gone as well. And that's a big thing about British parliamentary system. The cabinet is very important. So there's been a complete clear out of the people who were Chancellor, Foreign Secretary, Home Secretary, and there's now some decent people in who actually believe in Brexit.
Well, that's kind of where I was going to go. Your cabinet, otherwise kind of a parliament, is somewhat similar to our Congress, although it was a pretty much of a shoe-in for Boris Johnson, correct?
100%. He won it really easily. He won most of the votes of the MPs, and then it went to the Tory party members, and he won just around 68% of the vote voted for Boris.
He's quite the character, but he is. I've seen some videos of Boris, and you kind of go, "Wow!" But anyway, it seems as though Boris is really on the right side of all issues. I mean, on his approach is and his argument is on really restoring full sovereignty. I
think that's key. And the key thing about Boris is the big issue that matters just now in British politics is that Brexit gets delivered, and because that's what most people voted for, and that's what most people want, and they've said that no matter what happens, Brexit will be delivered on the 31st of October. So we've finally got someone in who is playing hardball with the European Union and is going to honour the result of the vote.
So we're hearing it's just going to be a clean break. I mean, Brexit is just like a goodbye, and there's not all these other channels and attachments to Brexit. Is that still holding true?
It's looking more and more likely. I mean, they've said they want to try and reopen the deal and get a better deal so that we leave on amicable terms. But the European Union just don't appear to be budging. Apparently, they've even disbanded their negotiation team. So the default legal position is that we leave on the 31st of October with what's known as a no-deal Brexit. And, you know, the Remain lobby make out that this is going to be a disaster. I think there'll be some teething problems, but it won't be anything like as bad they've been making it out to be.
I'm guessing it still holds true that Angela Merkel of Germany was the one that Theresa May and the original 2 or 3 Brexit deals were trying to please.
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, Merkel's no longer the towering figure of European politics she once was. I don't know if you've seen the pictures of her where she's been.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's not just 1 or 2 videos where she's, it's almost like a seizure. And
yeah.
She says, "Oh, she was just dehydrated." Well, no. Anyway.
No, she's reaching the end of her tenure as Chancellor of Germany, and I think she's not going to be remembered fondly by history.
David, was Brexit is the single largest issue of the reason Brexit was even born because of immigration?
I'd say that was the key issue. Yeah, it really, really was. It was the linchpin issue, and it's still not being solved. I don't think long term Boris and his the way things are will improve things. But once Brexit is delivered, there is an opportunity to then try and cut down immigration to try and rebuild the mess that's been created over the last 20 to 25 years.
I suspect, because you've got a very large financial community in London, and I would suspect that Boris and, some on his team have actually gone to the financial community and compared them or challenged them with some real tasks on the cost of immigration, low-skilled workers, economics, and having their suggestions on what effect immigration had on the UK and where it goes from here, if there can be some kind of control as to the economic forecast of the UK / Britain going forward. Do you suspect that's what Boris is kind of feeling out?
The big thing as well is with the Labour Party, there's Jeremy Corbyn as the leader, who's regarded as being extremely left-wing. And what the Tory Party have realised is that the voters will not stand for not delivering Brexit. And they realise that if they don't deliver Brexit, they will lose. And it would be a Jeremy Corbyn government. So what the Tory Party, all big business, have said is, look, we're not happy with a no-deal Brexit, but we would rather have a no-deal Brexit than a Jeremy Corbyn government.
So with the government, we have a no-deal Brexit. We go away, and everything is great. What do you expect? Go ahead.
There's still long-term structural problems in the United Kingdom, major problems that I don't see being solved very, very soon. And all the identity politics, the culture wars that you guys are really in the midst of is going to really start kicking in. I mean, it's already here, but it's going to kick in even more so over here as well.
Kind of define that for us, because whatever happens there is we're gonna watch closely. So our intelligence communities and our diplomatic wing is going to watch it carefully. So when you get into these long-term culture structural changes, what's that going to look like?
Well, you've got basically massive immigration that's happened, and then obviously the birth rate amongst immigrant communities is significantly higher than the indigenous communities as well. So you've got areas that are predominantly Muslim who will continue to become more and more and more Muslim. And what is interesting is that the left in the United Kingdom have embraced Islam as like a pet plaything. And what you actually found recently is there's been a lot of instances where Muslims have gone against the gay rights agenda and the LGBT agenda, and it's starting to kind of unravel the whole coalition between all these minority groups that's been happening for the last 10 or 15 years. And, I have a school of thought that sometimes you're better just letting nature take its course and watch all these groups fall out amongst each other.
David, you guys have been in this so long that come late this fall, you've got a clean break on Brexit.
Yeah.
When you mentioned the term structural, I would say when it comes to laws and law enforcement, there's going to have to be a whole cultural revolution, especially with a court system. I think that is probably the single largest issue to attack is people are going to have to unwind all this political correctness kind of stuff.
Correct.
And that could be a big, huge, long, Herculean task, David, right?
100%. And this is the problem. Your judiciary, your justice system, all your establishment, your civil servants are all very left-leaning, pro-European, pro-open borders, pro-globalist. So it's a major issue, and it's one I don't see changing anytime soon, to be honest with you.
Well, it's going to have to change pretty fast. I mean, where's the royal family on all this? Do they have some kind of influence?
Well, if anything, a lot of people are actually getting put off the royal family now. I mean, I used to be a big monarchist, but once I think a lot of people respect the Queen, but I think with Meghan Markle and the younger royals, they're becoming extremely political now, and it's very social justice politics and sort of woke politics, as you'd call it in America, and it's actually putting a lot of people off the royals now.
Yeah, we've seen kind of some indications of that. Yikes. I mean, where does this leave Ireland and Scotland?
Well, I think there's a lot of talk that Scotland will break off from the rest of the UK, Northern Ireland will become united. I don't see that happening, to be honest with you, just now. I think everything's up in the air. I think long-term Brexit will secure the future of the UK. I think Scotland will... Why would you leave the UK to then rejoin the EU? I think it would just be like complete insanity to do that. Considering it's your biggest trading partner. And then with Ireland, in Northern Ireland, it's complicated as well there now because you've got a lot of Catholics in Northern Ireland who don't like the direction the Republic of Ireland is taking, because the Republic of Ireland is now very pro-abortion, it's very pro-gay rights, whereas Northern Ireland is still quite socially conservative. And likewise, economically, Northern Ireland trades a lot more with the rest of the United Kingdom. So it's very complex and complicated.
How does UK Unity News handle all? I mean, I don't even know how you can begin to report all this because there are a lot of consequences to this. I mean, First, I think you have to deal with your judiciary. Then you're going to have to deal with law enforcement. Then you're going to have to deal with the economic component. Then you're going to have to deal with allied, issues. And then, you've obviously got a whole foreign policy thing. I would say this is a Herculean adventure that's going forward. Is this going to change up some? I mean, there's going to be some hurt between now and then, whenever the then is.
Well, yeah. I just think that leaving the EU is not as big a deal as people are making it out to be.
Okay.
The only people that are making it out to be such a big deal are the people that want to stay. And likewise, there will be a lot of people who are agitating to change. And I just think that you get on with Brexit, it gives us a chance to do things differently in the United Kingdom, but there are a myriad of problems that need to be solved in terms of immigration, in terms of political correctness, in terms of soft touch, policing, and then you've got other big problems with multinational corporations not paying their taxes, the lack of small businesses that are growing. There's not really as strong a base in the economy as there should be, and yeah, it's all, and I mean, we watch a great deal of what's going on in America just now in terms of the shootings and with President Trump. And the biggest issue we face is, of course, is a media that is out of control.
Yeah. Where's the BBC? I mean, is that your top media organization, the BBC?
Yeah, I mean, well, the BBC is funded through something called the TV license. So if you have a television in your home, in order to watch live television, you have to pay £12.50 a month.
Oh.
Every household, if they have a TV. So the BBC gets about 4 or 5 billion a year in funding.
Oh, wow.
I no longer watch live television in my house, so I no longer pay a TV license. More and more people are turning off the BBC. And then you've got Sky News, which is Rupert Murdoch owned, but is
right.
just as biased as the BBC. I mean, the BBC, Sky, ITV, all the media is very, very liberal, very pro-open borders, very anti-Brexit. And people see that. They're not stupid. They're sick of the media.
You've got certainly still some activist groups out there on both sides of this. Is that convoluting conditions and attitudes? Especially like with Britain First or Tommy Robinson. I mean, these groups. I mean, these groups, to be honest with you, is that they're not very well organised. They're not very disciplined, and they fall out with each other quite a lot. Right.
Which is an issue on what you would call the populist right in the UK. But I think within the next 5 to 10 years there will be a proper right-wing political party. I don't even like using the term right-wing. I would use the term populist. A populist political party, similar to what Salvini has in Italy, what Le Pen has in France, and what the AfD is in Germany. I think a true populist party will emerge within the next 5 to 10 years.
If you were going to give an interview at the BBC, what would be the top 2 issues that you would want to say to the BBC themselves?
What I would just say is we'll start competing in the real world. Stop taking a mandatory licence fee and stop spewing your propaganda. I don't actually engage with the mainstream media at all. We're trying to create our own news community here with alternative views, and these big behemoths they're tanking in numbers. They don't really know what to do, because media organizations can function on a fraction of the size of these companies. So it's people just clinging on to their jobs.
What about what are some of the other issues outside of the judicial system and immigration? Is there a healthcare problem? Is there an education problem?
There's massive problems in healthcare and education because you've got too many people trying to use the NHS. Now, we have a big issue with foreign health tourists in the United Kingdom where people just come and use healthcare. And there's a recent thing that doctors are too embarrassed to ask patients for proof that they're able to pay. There's just so many people live in these bubbles that they don't realise that someone else has to pay for it. So the NHS is struggling. Education is struggling as well in that regard. There's too many people living in the UK, and not enough being spent on public services.
I think when it comes to the UK with the deal with the healthcare and entitlements, that's going to be there's your other structural issue, but we need to hear more about that because we're struggling with it in a big, huge way over here. And as a consequence, if we learn what the issues are and the chaos that entitlements in healthcare are causing the UK and Britain, then we can take some leads. I believe in a universal healthcare system. I believe that healthcare should be free from the point of entry. But the problem is it's now being so badly abused, and it is now people are abusing the system, and you've got huge issues with like obesity in the UK and people that smoke and drink and use the service, and it's just sort of creaking under the weight. And those that can afford to will pay for private health care, but it's just the NHS is still good. It's still a good system, and you will get good care from it, but it's not as good as it could be. And a lot of that is to do with wastage, a lot of just, again, political correctness and not willing to tackle the problems head on. What about taxes?
Taxes in the UK, it is a big debate. I think overall the tax system is pretty... I think the tax system here isn't actually that bad. A lot of people complain, if the more you earn, the harder you get hit. But I think the tax system is not the worst in the United Kingdom. I think it's pretty fair. There's a big move as well to move people on lower incomes out of taxation. So any earnings less than 12,000, people no longer pay tax, which actually is proven to help the economy. So the taxation is not too bad in the UK compared to other countries, but it's how that taxation is being spent. And there's we still have foreign aid budgets where we're helping other countries around the world. There's certain things. Then there's also these vanity projects. There's like this thing called high-speed rail that's being built, and it's just a big white elephant. It's just the UK is at the moment badly run. It's not run very well, just like all sort of governmental organisations.
How about this thing with the oil tankers in Iran? Is that hitting the news headlines over there?
It is. It's always on the news, but nobody really cares, to be honest with you. Nobody wants a war with Iran. Nobody wants a war with Iran. As much as we might not like Iran, I think most people think it would be an absolute bloodbath.
Well, I guess we need to say thank you because I think the Brits are the only other people that are willing to help the United States right now keep the Persian Gulf somewhat open and functional. So thank you for that.
I think we need to on that, but I think the problem is as well as all the wars in the Middle East has created all these refugee crises. You've the Syrian refugee crisis, and at the end of the day, it's Europe and Britain and that's taking millions of people. So we don't really want any more wars in the Middle East that causes millions of refugees, because it's not healthy for anyone.
Well, I would say that when it comes to Turkey seems to be one of the bigger agitators in all of this, as well as Pakistan. So I don't know what Britain's relationship is with Turkey, and do you suspect that, at some point some of these refugees will? I mean, I think that Britain and Germany worked out some kind of a refugee deal with Turkey, and I think
Turkey. Well, Turkey are always threatening to allow all these refugees to start travelling again.
Yeah.
And the problem is as well, and I actually argue this from a humanitarian perspective. It's not fair with all these refugees saying, "Oh, come here and you'll have a great life." You're actually reaching a point where people are coming to the UK. They're working minimum wage jobs. They're not going to see opportunities to improve their lives. They're going to turn around and say, "Look, this is crap. This is no good." And that's my point. Is what you are doing with this mass immigration is you're actually draining countries of their intelligentsia and their middle class. You're bringing them to Europe and Britain and making them do menial jobs. Who is that helpful for? Nobody.
Well, we obviously have a lot of that over here. That's right. And that's the thing is as well, in America, it's you have to be saying to people, look, stay in your own countries and rebuild there. Yes. Well, it's going to be an interesting thing to watch. I'm going to have to keep tabs on you and UK Unity, your news outlet, which I think, I am paying attention on certainly on what you guys are reporting.
Thank you.
There's going to be a lot of turmoil here for Britain and going forward. Where's Nigel Farage? Is he helping out the way he needs to?
Well, he's been getting a bit of stick recently because they've not. My opinion is everybody needs to try and get behind Boris and support Boris just now to get Brexit, whereas Nigel Farage is like, we can't trust him. And I think he's kind of... I mean, the Brexit Party did a great job in focusing the Conservative Party's eyes about, this is what will happen if you don't deliver Brexit. But I think we have to focus now. 31st of October, we leave the European Union and then we get on with it. And that's just the way it's going to be. And we all need to focus on getting out of the EU and then getting our immigration controlled, putting an end to political correctness and trying to, salvage what we have here, because we can't keep going on the way things are. And I say this as well in America, when we look over there, you cannot have porous borders, people coming in and out you don't know. Yeah. And there's so many issues with that as well. And it's interesting I say that as well in America, like I would probably more naturally be a Democrat if I was in America, but there's no way I would vote Democrat now because they've gone so extreme, they've gone so far left now.
Oh yeah.
And they're unpalatable now, the Democrat Party, and I hope they stay out of power.
Well, Mr. David Clews, UK Unity, thanks for being with us and sharing all of this with us here in across the pond. We need to pay more attention because you guys are closer to the brink, I think, than we are, but you also are closer to the solution, too. So thank you for being with us and goodwill to all of you. And ladies and gentlemen, there's more coming your way on the Denise Simon Experience, heard worldwide on Mojo 50. Stay with us.
The truth. The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman. Seat over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder. Seat out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Press, Mike Charlie, 4 Tree 5, Niner 2-1, grid to Mark, Mike Charlie, 4-7 Tree, Niner, 8 Niner, out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark, smoke on the deck, 2 rounds HEVT, gas TOT 5-3.
And now, the Denise Simon Experience.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Denise Simon Experience, heard worldwide on Mojo 50. I got the distinct pleasure of having Dr. Steve Busler with us. He is a professor of finance and economics at Stockton University, a policy analyst as well. And I think he's doing some interesting critical thinking when it comes to China and trade. And that seems to be something that stays in the headlines. As fair warning to Dr. Steve, I don't personally care if we ever have a trade deal with China, so I'll set it up that way. But Dr. Busler, welcome to the Denise Simon Experience.
Well, hi, Denise. It's my pleasure to be here. And my first name is Michael.
Oh, Michael. Oh, yeah. Sorry.
No problem at all. And I'm still happy to be here.
Good answer. Thank you. I think it came through on the email, Steve, but my apologies.
Okay, no problem. We're good.
All right. So
yeah,
we hear little bits and pieces when it comes to having a trade deal with China. And now we're given the fair warning that we probably won't have one until sometime in 2020, which would be after the general election.
Yep.
That's okay with me. But we keep hearing that, there's going to be some consequences, and there already are some consequences of having some chaos when it comes to these trade deals because China has virtually attacked our agricultural industry. And we're going to have to throw out a bunch of subsidies and bailouts on that one, which I clearly understand. But there's more to the relationship that is sideways with China. Is that right?
Yeah, there certainly is. So let's take a look at the big picture for a minute. So President Trump comes into office. He takes a look at all of the trade deals that the U.S. has with all of our trading partners, and he found every single one of them was slanted in favor of our trading partners and to the detriment of the U.S. For instance, our agreement with the European Union. They produce a car, sell it, produce it in Europe, sell it in the U.S. We charge them a 2.5% tariff. We make a car in the U.S., sell it in Europe. They charge us a 10% tariff. China, we charge a 2.5% tariff for cars made there, sold in the U.S. But cars made in the U.S. and sold in China, they charge a 25% tariff. Well, the result of that is that our products are very expensive in overseas markets. And as a result, people don't buy very much, so none of their money flows into our country. Meanwhile, their goods are inexpensive because tariff is so low, so we buy a lot of their goods and a lot of our money flows out of the country. So President Trump said we have to stop this. He got into office, he talked to each one of our trading partners and said, listen, we have to renegotiate these trade deals. Well, every single one of them was not in a hurry to renegotiate anything because everything was so favorable to them. So President Trump, who's a business person and not a politician, President Trump did what any business person would do when you have a negotiation and the other side is reluctant to enter into it. You create a sense of urgency. So he created a sense of urgency by placing tariffs on just about everything for everybody. Well, already Mexico and Canada have agreed to a new trade deal. South Korea has agreed to a new trade deal. Japan and India are negotiating a new trade deal. And for the first time since Nixon normalized relations with China, China is negotiating a new trade deal. Now, so President Trump last fall gave China until May 1st to agree to a new trade deal with us. in the end of April, it appeared that they had agreed to that, and we had a deal. But then at the last minute, for whatever reason, they changed their mind and decided they weren't going to agree to some of the things we wanted. They weren't going to play fairly by the rules, and they weren't going to sign this deal. So May 1st came. President Trump said, look, I'll give you until September 1st, but no more time to come up with a new trade deal. Well, here it is now, early August. It's evident there's not going to be a new trade deal. So President Trump said, I'm putting another 10% tariff on all of the goods we have so far not put a tariff on, the remaining roughly $300 billion worth of goods China produces and sells in the U.S. Well, China retaliates. So when we initially put in tariffs, they put tariffs on agricultural products, soybeans and things that we sell to China, which of course raises the price of the soybeans in China, and as a result, they're buying less and looking to buy from somewhere else. And as you mentioned, that will hurt the agricultural industry in general, the soybean producers in particular. Trump said in order to minimize some of that damage, we'll pass some aid bills so that the agricultural industry is not severely impacted. So now we're getting up to September 1st. Trump puts new tariffs on. China retaliates by devaluing their currency. So what does that mean? It means where it used to take, let's say, $10 to buy a Chinese product, they devalued the currency, so now it only takes $9 to buy the same product. So what China attempted to do was to offset any potential price increases from the tariff by devaluing their currency. And that's what they did recently. Now, it will cause some severe problems for the Chinese. And the reason is when they devalue their currency, their goods become cheaper for us to buy, which is what they wanted to happen. But it also means that our goods are more expensive for the Chinese to buy. Now, normally, China wouldn't have too much of a problem with that. However, China doesn't have the capability to provide enough food for their entire population. So they have to buy food from others, including the U.S. Well, if you put tariffs on agricultural products, food becomes more expensive in China. The average Chinese worker has very low wages, and that's why manufacturing went to China in the first place, because the wage rates are so low. So you have workers with low wages, and now food is going up in price, and they're really getting squeezed by this. Lastly, they finally said, we're going to suspend buying any agricultural products from the U.S. Now, that's designed to hurt American farmers, which it will, but it means they're going to have to buy food from some other country that is probably more expensive. So what this results in, China is being hurt by this tariff war, this trade war, far more than the U.S. is being hurt. They had rapid growth for a decade, and that rapid growth has now started to slow significantly. And China is hurting as a result of this trade war. The effect on the U.S. is relatively minimal so far. It has hurt the agricultural industry. However, when Trump put a tariff on Chinese steel, raised the price of steel, the U.S. has the capability of making our own steel, which is what we're doing. So inflation continues to be relatively mild. And aside from the problems with the agricultural industry, there's not that much negative that's been hitting the U.S. consumer. So President Trump will keep this pressure on. It wouldn't surprise me if he decided by September 1st to make it a 25% tariff instead of a 10% tariff, because Trump is a negotiator. When you hit him, he's going to hit back harder. Mm-hmm. So how long will this go on? Well, we're hoping it ends relatively soon. It doesn't appear that that'll be the case. There's some talk now that China feels If Trump loses the election in 2020 and a Democrat gets in, they'll be able to make a better deal with the Democrats. The question is, can they wait a year and a half for a Democratic president to come in if Trump does not win? That remains to be the question. But this trade war is hurting China far more than it is hurting the U.S.
Great presentation, great explanation on that. Now, let me throw some sand in the gears.
Go ahead.
For the sake of our farmers, for the agricultural industry, is Lighthizer, the trade representative, looking at saying, all right, we're going to take soy or avocados or whatever else it is, and we'll sell it to, Colombia or Egypt, and then they get to make 1%, if you will, and then they can turn around and sell it to China. So is this an opportunity to throw a third party, a third entity, a kind of a monkey in the middle on this one?
It is certainly a possibility, and I would imagine that entrepreneurs in other countries will see this as an opportunity.
Yes.
The U.S. is having trouble selling their soybeans, so they'll try to buy them at a low price. China has been selling their have to purchase soybeans at a high price. So somebody could act as a middleman and try to do that. That's very possible. The other thing is, if China buys from another soybean manufacturer, another country, who that country typically sells to won't be able to buy from them. So the U.S. may find other customers that way.
Yeah. So it's a machinery. I mean, this is a real chess board as I see it. But also too, complicating all of these talks with China are all the other things. And I would say beyond devaluing their currency, we also have the fact that they continue to steal our intellectual property.
Right.
And that's on top of the manufacturers that are already there. They are forced to give up their blueprints and so forth in order to manufacture there. So we have the military component in the South China Sea. We've got the Huawei deal. And then we've got debt trapping that's going on by China in developing countries, I would say, that we're trying to intervene in. So this isn't just, these discussions, Dr. Busler, are just not about trade into itself. They're getting, one conversation leads to another. Certainly I can throw in the 5G component and I can throw in the Silk Road component, right?
Yeah. In fact, that's really what the sticking point is. If it was just international trade, we could probably work something out with China. The real issue is on these intellectual property rights. China will not honor our intellectual property right. And as a result, they try to copy things. And as you mentioned, manufacturers that go into China have to essentially give away their secrets to the Chinese government. Now that China is a big player in future technology, and you mentioned 5G, which I think they have a little bit of a lead on us.
I do too.
Developing. Yeah, President Trump doesn't want to lose any technological advantage that we have. So as tough as he has to be on China, he will, because they've got to play by the same rules everybody else plays by, and that means they're going to have to honor our intellectual property rights. It's even a little more complicated than that, because the U.S., if I can just add one more thing, the U.S. placed sanctions on Iran, and means nobody's supposed to buy Iranian oil, yet China has been buying a lot of Iranian oil. They're also not supposed to sell things to North Korea because we have sanctions. China is violating those sanctions too. So it is a complicated situation. If it involved just trade, we could probably work something out. But you throw in the intellectual property and the cheating on the sanctions, and you have a very complicated situation.
Dr. Busler, if Trump had done nothing, if he didn't begin, if he hadn't have lit this fuse when it comes to trade with China, and we just kind of said, all right, we'll just stay with what we have in the on that matter, we still would have these other issues when it comes to 5G and intellectual property. So it still would have involved trade on the backside, correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. The trade deal was what triggered this when Trump looked at the trade agreements. But as he got further into this and he realized that China is stealing our intellectual property, they're not honoring agreements, it became a little more of a comprehensive deal. And that's, I think, why it's so difficult. But even if Trump didn't start the trade war, we still would have to deal with this. And the longer you take to deal with this, the worse it gets. So we should be thankful that Trump finally confronted the problem. The Obama administration had looked at this. They convened a summit. They talked a little bit and convened another and talked again. And their position was, well, let's kick this can down the road to the next president. Let him worry about it, or her worry about it. But President Trump is not a politician. He's a business person. Politician would do the politically correct thing and kick the can down the road if that was possible. A business person confronts problems as soon as possible and seeks the optimum solution as quickly as you can. And that's what Trump is trying to do.
Dr. Busler, in my world, and you need to help me and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe the matter of intellectual property and the competition on the military component and 5G are actually more important to the near future of the United States and our allies than trade with China.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Look, the trade. Yeah, I would agree. The trade is a problem because Chinese markets are not open to U.S. manufacturers, not just in agriculture, but in other industries too. And because of the lopsided trade agreements, we have a negative balance of trade with China to the tune of $400 or $500 billion a year, and that's money flowing out of our country into China. Trump is right. We built the Chinese empire because they had these unfair trade deals, and they were sucking so much money out of the U.S., and Trump said, I'm not going to let this happen anymore.
I would say I happen to be retired from the international telecom industry. And so when it comes to 5G and telecom, and I've been out of it for a long time, but I would say that the telecom companies are probably putting significant pressure on the Trump administration and our U.S. trade representative more so than the agricultural industry because of where, if you kind of lay out where things are going to go with tech and 5G, which is really upon us, they're actually testing 5G.
Yes.
I would say that he's probably should have 5G and intellectual property that coincide with 5G at the top of his desk. In other words, that'd be much more important than, soybeans.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. The soybean and the agricultural and the product markets, we could probably work that out one way or another. But these intellectual property rights, China insists that they have a right to our knowledge, and we say, look, you don't have a right to our knowledge, and if you keep stealing these things, you're going to get these technological advantage over us, and we're just not going to allow that. We do all the work, invest in research and development, and get these new technologies commercialized, and then China ends up going and without paying us anything for them, just goes ahead and steals them and uses them to their advantage, and then tries to build from them. President Trump will not allow that to continue, even if he keeps saying China wants a trade deal, and I think they do want a trade deal. They don't want a deal on intellectual property, but they do want a trade deal. So President Trump, though, won't agree to any trade deal unless these intellectual property rights are addressed, and China seems very reluctant to do that.
Dr. Busler, we're not hearing about trade deals between China and Britain, or China and Germany, or China and Argentina. How come?
Well, we're the only ones that have such a lopsided trade agreement with China, and I don't know how that happened. Every one of the trade agreements the U.S. has is lopsided in favor of the trading partner. I don't know whether we put these deals, we had compassion and we said, look, we have to help these countries grow. But for whatever reason, they're slaying it. Look, it's like you're playing a baseball game, and we get 3 outs per inning, and we give the other side 4 outs per inning. Well, you do that long enough, you're going to start losing every baseball game. And that's exactly what's happening, and Trump wants everybody to get 3 outs per inning, and that's it.
What is the World Trade Organization's involvement in all this? I mean, do we really need to have a World Trade Organization to start with?
Well, in theory, the World Trade Organization is where you would take all of these disputes. In practice, if you file a complaint, it's going to take 2 or 3 years before they get to it, and they really don't seem to have the teeth that they were supposed to have. We have filed numerous complaints against China and their manipulation of the currency. We just filed another one yesterday, the day before, of them manipulating their currency. But the World Trade Organization really doesn't have the ability to do much to change that. So not much is going to happen. And Trump said, look, I'm tired of this bureaucracy and the politically correct way of doing things and having nothing happen. I'm going to go in and I'm going to create that sense of urgency so things will happen. And we're going to put America back in a better position, at least on a equal playing field with our trading partners, and not with these deals that hurt us and help them.
It seems to be a systemic problem when we get into these global organizations, the International Criminal Court, the United Nations, World Trade Organizations, the International Monetary Fund. None of them have played, I would say, anything in the favor of the United States. So we seem to have a systemic problem there. And I think we ought to probably, look at all of those global organizations and see, who's at the basis of that, which I would argue in this case would probably be China and Russia, but that's just me.
Could be.
They always seem to have the veto vote against the United States, and they're obviously pro-Iran, pro-Russia, pro-China.
Yeah.
Dr. Busler, we're so pleased. I mean, you explained this all so easily for us. We obviously see that it's unresolved, that we have no solution that's going to be near term. But I think that also, too, plays in our favor, except when it comes to our agriculture industry, we're going to probably have to go to a bailout on that one, but it is what it is. I think with the monies that the currency that leaves the United States that's been in favor of China necessarily would stay here, and that can help out some of those farmers. So, Congress, I think, is going to have some real decisions to make in front of them, and when they come back into session. Dr. Busler, it's been a real pleasure having this conversation with you. Again, your explanation, your presentation was easily to understand and in simplistic terms. So we appreciate the effort and the attention that you've given this. And I hope you'll come back, because I don't think that the matter of China is going to be a tired subject for a while. So please come back.
I certainly will. Thank you for having me, and I appreciate your kind words.
All right. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, there's more coming your way. So stay with us on the Denise Simon Experience. And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Denise Simon Experience, heard worldwide on Mojo 50. We have this thing that the candidates out there are saying, we need Medicare for all. And it's going to be a great thing. And so I'm very delighted to have Dr. David Hogberg with us, who wrote a book a couple of years ago titled Medicare's Victims. And in full disclosure, this radio host just went on Medicare. Haven't used it yet. Hope I never have to. But David, welcome to the Denise Simon Experience.
Well, thank you for having me.
You happen to be, I guess, an expert at this, given that the basis of the book, enough that you were talking, you speak to stories and doctors in the system and how it's all gone sideways. Is there enough out there, David, that it was so compelling that you probably need to write volume 2 for this book? Is that right?
Well, getting volume 1 out was a very lengthy process that I'm not eager to undergo again. But the main thrust of the book, and the reason I wrote it, is that the political left, when they promote single-payer health care here in the U.S., they always call it Medicare for all, because Medicare is, when you look at public opinion polls, is a fairly popular program. But I figured, it's a government program. It's going to have its flaws, and I just started digging into it and into those, and the book was the result. And the general thrust of the book is one of the reasons that Medicare is popular is that the key demographic that fall under Medicare are people aged 65 to 74, and they vote at rates higher than almost anyone else. And so, of course, politicians are going to make certain that Medicare, works for them, because, if they don't, then, seniors are going to show up on voting day, and politicians will feel the pain. But when you start looking at groups that don't have that sort of political power, say, for example, at least with regard to Medicare, say the disabled, you start finding, a lot more problems. For example, the disabled have to wait over 2 years to get on Medicare, and a lot of disabled are uninsured during that time. It can be difficult to meet the meet their medical expenses during that time, and even once they're on Medicare, they oftentimes don't have the sort of private insurance that covers a lot of Medicare's co-pays and out-of-pocket costs and so forth, which still can make it difficult to meet medical expenses. And it's basically been that way. The 2-year waiting period has been that way since the disabled went on Medicare in the early 70s, and it's never changed, because at least with regard to Medicare, the disabled do not have that sort of political power.
What are they supposed to be waiting for? I mean, is something going to cure them in the meantime?
Well, I guess the thinking was at the time that, that they didn't want people jumping onto Medicare off their private insurance. Exactly why they would be so eager to do that, I don't know, but I mean, things have certainly changed since the 1970s. It would probably be a lot easier to find out who's jumping off private insurance onto Medicare quickly. And there have been attempts to shorten that waiting period, but they never go anywhere, because, the disabled, there's something like over 100 programs that serve at the federal level that serve the disabled in some way. So, when it comes to lobbying and getting money out of the federal government, which, by the way, I do not think is generally the way to go to solve and our social problems in this country and to help people. But that said, their efforts become more scattershot, and there's all sorts of different programs that there's groups that lobby for the disabled, put their efforts into. Whereas seniors, there's basically only two programs that really affect them at the federal level, and that's Social Security and Medicare, and that makes it much easier for groups like the AARP and other groups that represent seniors to, focus their efforts.
During debates or when we have these candidates out there that are saying Medicare for all, I want to be sitting next to you when this is broadcast on TV because I want to hear what you're grumbling about when they're trying to sell all this.
I don't usually sit and watch those debates. I'll watch a few clips on YouTube afterwards, right after I've had some coffee and something to eat and, in the morning. But I don't. Those things always come on right before bedtime, and I want to be able to sleep peacefully, so I don't watch them.
All right, but the whole premise, I mean, you got to have some kind of a takeaway given all that you learned when you wrote the book. Well,
absolutely. I mean, the basic thing is that if we were to switch to a system of Medicare for all, it would work relatively well for people that have political power that can, push for changes to benefit them in a government, in that kind of a government program. The people who will lose out will be those without political power. And you see this in other countries that have adopted single payer, particularly with regard to the waiting periods that people who need major surgery, whether it's heart surgery, hip and knee replacements, cancer treatment, that they often have to endure, sometimes months, sometimes years. And the reason is that those groups of people, the people who need major surgery, are not very politically powerful, and that's why those systems do not the people who are the sickest under those systems often have to wait long periods of time because they are not politically powerful. It's a small number of people who get that sick every year, and they have 100 different things to worry about. Getting involved in politics to push politicians to change the system so that it reduces waiting times is not something that they're going to be doing, and that's eventually what would develop here in the United States.
Speak to price fixing for a second, if you would.
Sure. Well, if I may here, there's actually a bill in front of the Senate right now called the Lower Healthcare Costs Act that actually does is going to try to impose price controls on insurance companies, and it's threatening to be a repeat of Obamacare, and that patients could lose their doctors in the sense that they'd eventually find that their doctors were not covered by their health care plans. And what this bill is supposed to do is help people who have unexpected medical bills that result out of when they need emergency care, but they receive emergency care that is out of network, that their insurance doesn't cover. And to try to deal with this, the bill imposes a price control on insurers. It forces them to pay the median price they pay for a service. So let's say that you end up in the hospital and your physician comes by to check on you. If that physician visit is not covered, if it's out of network, the insurer will pay the median price that it pays to all physicians for such a visit. And what this does is it provides, it gives insurance companies two perverse incentives. The first one being that they will have an incentive to get rid of more of their higher-priced providers, their higher-priced doctors. Mm-hmm. Why? Because eliminating those from their networks means the median price they'll pay for doctors and other services will drop. And second, by eliminating those higher-priced doctors from their networks, those doctors then become out of network, so a patient sees one of those doctors, and the insurance company only has to pay them the much lower median price instead of the higher price they used to have to pay them. And if that happens, patients are going to find that their doctors won't be covered under their insurance plans. And this is what happened when, similar to when Obamacare came online in early 2014. then, insurers insurance companies had all these controls on them. They had to, figure out ways to make up the difference. And one thing they did is in a lot of plans, they reduced the number of doctors and other higher cost providers that were in those plans. And people who had a doctor for years found out that all of a sudden their insurance didn't cover their doctor. And that's a real problem because, a lot of patients have, long-term relationships with their doctor. It's a relationship that's built on trust and price controls, especially the one in the Lower Healthcare Costs Act, can disrupt those relationships, which is probably not good for anybody's health.
Yeah, I happen to know that a lot of good doctors have actually kind of left the whole system, and there's fewer of them, especially the board certified doctors, and they're having to replace those. And I'm seeing an awful lot of foreign doctors that don't. They were educated in some university, some medical school, that we've never even heard of, clearly outside the United States. And they have a very different kind of ethos when it comes to treating patients that doesn't match what, our, I guess doctrine is here in the United States.
Well, sure. So, I mean, I would say that is the result of more and more government getting involved in the healthcare system, is that people who are native born to the U.S., when they find out that it gets, because of price controls, it gets harder to earn a living, or that because of all this government regulation, it becomes harder for them to practice medicine in the way they think they should be practicing, the way they think it should be, it would be best for their patients. They are, creative people like that, people that are that dedicated, will go into other fields. To have enough doctors, it then makes sense to bring in folks that are from other countries, to whom, working in that kind of system looks good because you're going from, maybe a third or second world country to the United States, at least in that sense, it's a big step up. And I have not seen any research on what impact that has on quality. It would be interesting if someone were to do that. Sometimes I've had foreign born doctors who are excellent. I'm sure there are ones out there that, maybe are not quite up to the standards of the U.S., but it's something that you at least at the very least you have to ask, what impact does that have on quality? And it's something that we'd probably be having to do less of if we didn't have so much government involvement in our healthcare system.
You speak to reforming Medicare. And this was, way back in 2015 when you wrote the book. And we've come a long way since then. And given the fact that we are being sold now that we ought to have a single payer Medicare for all system, you'd have to completely reform it anyway. But the reform that you spoke to in 2015 would have been very different than what would necessarily happen now in reform, right?
Well, yes. I mean, a single payer basically means you give more control to politicians, to bureaucrats, to powerful interests, healthcare interests, and you take away power from where it really belongs, which should be in the hands of the patient. Why? Because the patient is the one who pays the biggest cost should a healthcare decision go wrong, whether it's in time, pain, death, which is the ultimate cost, money. Patients have the biggest stake in getting a decision correct, and so the power should lie with them. And I would much prefer a healthcare system where patients have far more control over how healthcare dollars are spent. That's how we have power and leverage in other sectors in our society. You don't like how a grocery store treats you, you go to another grocery store.
Competition.
Competition. There you go. And I would like to see far more reforms that put the healthcare dollars far more under the control of patients. There's lots of different ways that we can do that. I had some suggestions for that in my book. I would like to see more and more things like expanded health savings accounts where people can, save up money and use those dollars to purchase health care more directly or pay for their health insurance out of those accounts. All sorts of things like that we could be doing, but at this point we seem to be a very, very long way from that.
What do you see on the horizon? I'm almost seeing that you do need to write volume 2, because I think that you're actually predicting a larger disaster than where we are today.
I have to admit I'm not terribly optimistic for a couple of reasons. Number one, the general trend has been, especially since the 1960s, of more and more government involvement in healthcare. I mean, and it's oftentimes small incremental creep, which by which I mean government creeping into healthcare, which is occasionally punctuated by the big changes like Medicare in the 60s or Obamacare more recently. I mean, there's only been a very few exceptions to that trend, and one of the reasons is the political left has always taken healthcare far more seriously than the political right, than conservatives. I think conservatives for the longest time have thought that all we need to do is keep single payer from happening, and the current system we have, for example, the system with employer-based health insurance would be perfectly fine. Well, employer-based health insurance creates a whole set of problems, and that needs to be changed. But you can't. But it's hard to get conservatives to take it seriously. It's hard to get Republicans to even understand, by which I mean politicians, to even understand what the problems are. I mean, this bill that I was just talking about, the Lower Health Care Costs Act, has been promoted by a Republican, Lamar Alexander, senator from Tennessee. We still have a lot of these old school Republicans who, this bill is bipartisan, and they think that if a bill is bipartisan, that makes it good.
Yeah, yippee skippy.
Yeah, a lot of insurance companies are on board with this bill because it gives them an easier way to pay for. It gets them out of these out of network problems, and someone like Lamar Alexander thinks that, hey, if big businesses are in favor of something, it must be good. It must be free market, which of course is not what it means at all. Big businesses are more than happy to use government to tilt the playing field in their favor when it suits them. So I have to admit I'm not very optimistic, and I just hope that it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen for about another 40 years,
40?
maybe 50. But I'm hoping another 40 years, because then I will probably, if I'm not gone from this earth, I will be very close to shuffling off the mortal coil. So I won't have to worry about it.
Me too.
I'll leave that to my 3-year-old son. Hey, he's got to have some problems to deal with, right?
Let me talk about a little bit, because the fraud component, because the FBI actually has a whole division that does nothing but Medicare fraud. And what is particularly interesting is just a few months ago in April, the FBI launched something called Operation Brace Yourself.
Yeah.
Operation Brace Yourself actually prosecuted a case, or involved at least 24 people, that they were bilking the Medicare system for over $1 billion. Okay.
Well, I'm not particularly surprised. I Medicare fraud is not my big area of expertise. I can speak to it slightly. I remember years ago I was at a presentation at the American Enterprise Institute, and one guy up there who had worked for Medicare for years, he'd just written a book, and he said that when you looked at most of the Medicare fraud cases, it was almost always involved the actual government part of the program. It almost never involved the Medicare Advantage program, where people would get their Medicare benefits through a private insurance company. Why? Because private insurance companies have a big incentive to reduce, keep fraud from happening. Why? Because when they get defrauded, it affects the bottom line, and it could be just simple things like the insurance company calling. They get a bill from a doctor. Hey, we haven't gotten one from this guy in a while. What's going on? And they call up to see if the doctor still is alive. Just simple stuff like that. But the government has no incentive to do that. I mean, if the government loses money, you shove it off on the taxpayers. You shove it off on, you go borrow money, which, of course, shoves it off on future generations. There's just nowhere near the incentive to crack down on fraud that there is in the private sector. And, I don't exactly know what to do about that. I think, some of the suggestions I had with regard to Medicare reform and putting the dollars more in the hands of the patient would probably go a long way to reducing Medicare fraud. It wouldn't completely do it, but patients would now want to make sure that their money is being properly spent and so forth. But I think you're going to have bigger problems with fraud as long as programs are run exclusively by the government, whether that's federal or state. You see lots of fraud in Medicaid as well. So I don't have any really good answers for that, but I can tell you what the source of the problem is.
Well, this one was kind of interesting because apparently the bulk of this particular case that was over $1 billion, which had gone on for 5 years, was dealing with a scheme on billing Medicare for medical equipment for the patient that really never happened, and that there were kickbacks on that. And so it was medical equipment and what is known as telemedicine companies. So,
I remember years ago that there was all sorts of cases in Florida involving this, and there were people patients who were still alive who were receiving these notices saying, just explaining what benefit they had received and how much Medicare had paid, and they were contacting the federal government saying, I didn't get this. I mean, you got something going on here, and the federal government was not exactly jumping up and down, getting on it. I mean, I imagine an insurance company, if they heard from a patient, they would be dealing with it very, very quickly. And again, it's just the federal government does not have the same incentive to reduce fraud because it doesn't affect the federal government's bottom line. I mean, the federal government doesn't really have a bottom line. Right. The way private companies do. And that is, it's not to say there isn't fraud in the private sector. It doesn't happen. It does. It's just which, system results in, deals with it better. And I think the private sector does.
It's really quite remarkable. I would think that the FBI would speak out a little bit more about these cases, especially when they've got an exclusive division that is dedicated to Medicare and Medicaid fraud. I mean, $1 billion in just one case that dealt with 24 people is a pretty significant, I would say, FBI criminal case, wouldn't you?
You would think. I mean, I'm not a huge expert on the FBI, but I'll just say this. I mean, the FBI has to deal with so many different crimes and different types of law enforcement that, they are, their ability to give more attention to any one particular issue. I mean, their resources at any given point are limited, and they have to spend them and direct them on all sorts of different things. So, if you, that's probably, if Medicare fraud deserves more attention and it's not getting it, that's probably why.
I expect you to be at the next town hall with Bernie Sanders. Are you going to show up and confront him? And come on, David.
I think
that would be great TV.
I think that if I was in let's suppose Bernie Sanders and I were in a room, and Bernie Sanders said, what would you say to me about health care? And I would look at him and say goodbye and then leave, because it would be a waste of time. I mean, you're not going to persuade him in any way, shape, or form that Medicare for all is the wrong way to go. You don't go out and try to persuade people who are that extreme, that committed to more government in healthcare. You need to go out and persuade more and more people in the middle, moderates, and maybe even some moderate liberals that we need change that goes in the free market direction. Yes, confronting Bernie Sanders might make for great TV, but I don't know, whether that makes even the most marginal difference in terms of getting away from government control to giving it back to the patient. I doubt it.
All right, skip Bernie Sanders. What about Elizabeth Warren then?
Same thing. I mean, I'd say goodbye. I mean, I just, the only reason I would ever maybe, talk to her about health care is if, she and I were having a public debate about it, but I doubt she would waste her time with, someone like David Hogberg. I mean, and it's just, I'm not worried about reaching the Elizabeth Warrens. I'm worried about, we need to reach, 60 to 70% of the population is where we need to go, not the hardcore leftists who are really committed to single payer health care. It's a waste of time with them.
Indeed it is. So I think, remember the old chain letters that you'd send a letter to somebody and then they'd turn around and send it to somebody else? I think that you need to start on a chain letter campaign here to these politicians on both sides of the aisle, I might add, because we're being sold something that's just not accurate, correct?
Oh yeah, that's absolutely the case, and I wish that there were more groups really dedicated to fighting single-payer health care. I wish there was a concerted effort among not only conservative groups but Republicans and some Democrats to really educate themselves on this issue and fight it, and not wait until you are on the cusp of something like Obamacare to get yourself up to speed, and this needs to be something that is kind of ongoing, and that's kind of one of the things that I found frustrating working on this issue when I was in a conservative think tank, is that it's just not something that conservatives take seriously, except when we are on the cusp of something like Obamacare, and this needs to be more of an ongoing campaign. And unfortunately I don't have any answers right now on how to get conservatives and Republicans just to take it more seriously. I mean, there's been improvement in the recent years. There was, Obamacare did provide them with a wake-up call, but as you saw in the early part of the Trump administration, Republicans could not get any serious health care reform to the president's desk. I mean, they barely got it out of the House, and part of that is, I think, what they were doing, they had not prepared the groundwork on how to explain what they were doing, how to sell it to the American public, and so we've got a long way to go.
You sold us,
but again,
you sold us.
Yeah, well, but I hate to leave you on this, but I'm just not that optimistic. I'm sorry.
We like the honesty over here at the Denise Simon Experience. Big, huge thanks to David Hogberg with his book, Medicare's Victims. Thanks so much for all the honesty. And ladies and gentlemen, it's been a real pleasure having you with us on the Denise Simon Experience. We'll see you again very soon.